Welcome to another one of my very own roast demands. It's like what Perspective N does, but I'm doing it.
You are an abusively ugly piece of shit that should be a crime to be allowed to continue existing. You are a walking backpack with a glass visor and hands that just appear when you need them to. It's funny that you move so quickly in the game. When your legs are so short, you probably move slower than a penguin, an abominably hideous penguin. I bet that if you took that suit off, you'd look like you were designed to survive a car crash. No wonder why none of you have a picture on your ID card. You're too self-conscious to put an actual picture of yourself on it. If I woke up to see this whenever I looked in the mirror, I would take a chance to go on a space mission just so I could set the scale to self-destruct and kill every other ugly piece of filth that I came onto the ship with. Because it would be immoral to let such a hideous species to reproduce and prosper.
And that, my friends, is the average Roadbreach video. Hello friends and welcome newcomers. My name is Netherless and today we are going to be responding to a video from 3 years ago that is a completely horrendous review of the critically acclaimed party game Among Us. Now Roadbreach is the one behind this video and he is quite the character. You might have seen a few previous videos of mine about him and he is honestly not the brightest tool in the shed. You might be wondering why I am responding to this video now, even though it came out 3 years ago. And it's because 1, I would technically be the first one responding to it, and 2, Roadbreach still holds the same bad opinion of Among Us to this day. And I merely want to correct him, not because I want him to change his opinion, but because his reasonings on having said opinion are really, really dumb. So we're gonna go ahead and take a look at his review of Among Us. Let's get to it, shall we?
Among Us was developed by Innersloth and published by Tom Brow and was released on November 16th, 2018!
We're off to a phenomenal start with Roadbreach using completely unnecessary ear rape. I had to literally turn down the volume on that part because of how loud it was, just to put into perspective how unnecessarily loud that was. There is no punchline to the ear rape either, it's just him complaining about how despite the fact Among Us came out in 2018, it gained massive popularity in 2020. And the biggest factor on why Among Us blew up so much in that year is mainly because of the pandemic that year. So yes, Roadbreach is clearly just bitching in this clip for the sake of bitching.
On PC and mobile. This game has been popping up everywhere on social media, with tons of memes, fan art, and fan songs. I've avoided this game for a long time, and personally, I'm sick and tired of seeing it. It just looks like an unremarkable version of Club Penguin.
Bro is really comparing Among Us to Club Penguin? Why? Those are two completely different games from one another. One game is where people went around to socialize with others and play mini games with them. The other is a murder mystery. They are not comparable in the slightest. Even if you're talking about the aesthetics, they don't match in any capacity.
With its cheap-ass presentation.
Cheap-ass presentation, as if Among Us was supposed to look pretty in the first place. Boo-hoo, they went with an incredibly simplistic art style, the same type of art style you'd see in the Henry Stickmin games. Which makes sense because both Among Us and Henry Stickmin were made by the same people. What, you want Among Us to have beautiful graphics and the likes of Death Stranding or something? Give me a break.
But I've decided to play it for myself. After all, you don't judge a book by its cover, and you shouldn't judge a game by its graphics. So, how does this game hold up? Well, let's suit up and see what this game has to offer. Right off the bat, this game's graphics are unappealing.
Roadbreach, you just said you shouldn't judge a game by its graphics, yet here you are, judging the game by its graphics. And graphics isn't even the right term for it, it's just the art style of the game. And bro, look. I really don't think you should be a judge of a game's aesthetics when you make incredibly bad drawings like this and that. Imagine a game that looks like this. That would be visually unappealing.
It looks like a cheap MMO from 1999 with this simplistic art style and these Newgrounds animations that remind me of Jazz's childhood art.
Yeah, because that's kind of the charm of it. It looks like a game that you would play on Newgrounds, which also makes sense. The Henry Stickmin games were also on Newgrounds. Like, bro, do you know what a Flash game is? That's the whole point of why Among Us looks the way it does, because it looks like a Flash game.
I'm not suggesting that a game needs to have graphics on par with the Louvre, but at the same time, Undertale has a simplistic art style, but it's as charming as can be and reminds you of something that you'd see on the NES.
This can be applied to Among Us as well. Like I mentioned earlier, Among Us looks like a Flash game with the simplistic art style it has. People like that stuff. Just because it's not Undertale's art style doesn't mean it's ugly to look at. That's just your opinion.
Minecraft is pretty minimalist, but it's still very appealing. And even games like Yoshi's Island can look eye-catching.
Among Us was never meant to be eye-catching, my guy. It was supposed to be, and always will be, a silly-looking party game where everyone involved is just playing a game of whodunit. It's not a pretty-looking PS4 game, it's not Undertale, it's a silly wannabe Flash game of whodunit. You are comparing this game to others that are not in the same category. None of these comparisons make any sense. You are just denigrating the art style because you don't think it's pretty to look at.
I mean, there's effort put in here, but this player character design certainly didn't draw me in. It's still more appealing than JJBA though.
Whatever, okay.
As for music, well, what do we got here? We got serviceable, stock-sounding tunes not worth mentioning. Let's move on. Brr, but you mentioned them anyway. I don't care!
Oh wow, what a knee slapper, dude. So funny. You should really do stand-up comedy, Roadbreach. You got the whole squad laughing. On a serious note though, it's kinda crazy that you say the menu music in Among Us is just serviceable stock music. That's not worth mentioning. Did you know that the menu music is based on The Thing? You know, that really popular horror movie? It makes a lot of sense they do something like that, especially with how the imposter is supposed to look and how the game is meant to be played. It's almost like you can't really put two and two together.
The controls are abysmal. Every time you make a slight move with the joystick, you always go sailing off and smacking your stupid face into a fucking wall. It feels like I'm going to plow through the damn wall of this stupid spaceship because I feel like I'm traveling at the speed of goddamn light.
You do know that different lobbies have different settings, right? By the way, those lobby settings are horrendous. Why is the kill cooldown almost a minute long and the movement speed is ×3? That's ridiculous. Regardless though, you could always start your own lobby and create your own settings. It's not that hard. You're complaining about a non-issue that you decided to stick with instead of going to a different lobby that has different settings.
You want me to do my tasks, or do you want me to feel like I'm going to smack through the stupid wall of the spaceship?
Bro, if you're uncomfortable with the movement speed, just go to a different lobby, or make your own. It's not that difficult. Among Us lobbies fill up really quickly. They still do, to this day.
Each match, a member of your team is randomly assigned the role of the imposter, and you need to figure out who it is while you complete tasks like swiping your ID card, rewiring terminals, and testing some sort of weird samples of space stuff. I don't know, maybe it's ET urine or something. I'll be honest, I did have a small bit of fun while doing these after a while. If you see a dead body, you have to report it, and you and your crew figure out who would do. But if you feel nervous, you can issue an emergency meeting. When these things happen, you can enter a chat to discuss who you think the imposter might be. If you get voted out, you're sent into space, and it's game over for you.
That's not entirely true either. If you die as a crewmate, you can still do tasks to help out the crewmates that are still alive, just so there's still a chance that the imposter might lose. It's only if someone is the last imposter remaining that gets ejected that the game will end. I'm not going to bring up things like the Guardian Angel either, because by the time this video came out, roles and other sorts of content in the game did not exist back then.
And if the imposter gets voted off, the match ends. But that's only the role of the crewmates. What about the imposter? I don't know. In every match I participated in, I was a crewmate, but I'm not going to keep playing until I get randomly assigned the role of the imposter because f*** off.
So instead of giving the game an actual fair chance, you decided to just denigrate it even further because you never cared to play as the imposter. This is pretty much a completely unfair review at this point because he's missing out like half of the game if he doesn't care enough to play more and potentially become the imposter. And I personally think that playing as the imposter is the most fun you could ever have while playing Among Us, especially if you're playing with friends.
But from what I've seen, you need to blend in with the rest of your crew and kill them off one by one. So if a body gets found, a crew member can report it, and you need to blend in with the rest of the crew and avoid getting voted off. So it's best you hide your victims. The biggest problem with this is that after a while, after this game has been out for a long time, people start to get good at it, and it comes to the point when a match ends so early because you end up figuring out who the imposter is just that quickly.
No, that just means that the imposter you're playing against is a bad imposter. Normally, when a match ends that quickly in Among Us, that means the imposter made a mistake right in the beginning and they couldn't make a proper alibi. Then again, there's no need for them to even make an alibi. You're playing in public lobbies, which are infamous for getting random people voted off if you happen to stumble upon the wrong people. It's also much harder to use the chat on mobile than it is on PC, which is why it's most preferred for me to play this on PC. Also, people getting good at Among Us is not a problem in the game. Crewmates are not exclusively the smarter players. The imposters can be really good too if they play their cards right. Sabotage the area to distract crewmates, hide the bodies, come up with an alibi, and you can easily win as the imposter. You wouldn't even know how to properly play the imposter anyways because you self-admittedly didn't care enough to play as the imposter for this review.
And the structure of the game doesn't allow for much longevity in the long run. The game's structure is just fundamentally flawed.
How is it fundamentally flawed? It's a social deduction game. Social deduction games can be really fun when playing with friends. If Among Us is flawed because of that, then so are games like Werewolf and Town of Salem. It sounds more like Among Us isn't your type of game, mostly because you're stupid and can't pick up on social cues, which was evident by the way because we recently played Among Us with him a few weeks ago, but that's besides the point. We're talking about his review, not the recent playthroughs we had with him.
The reason why I like Splatoon 2 over Among Us is because that game actually provides a little bit of a challenge.
Again, what is with these comparisons? First Club Penguin, now Splatoon? Splatoon's not even close to the same category of game as Among Us. And yes, Among Us can be challenging. If the imposter ends up being really good, that is the challenge. Figuring out who it is and surviving. Like, my guy, you've already lost the debate if you're comparing Among Us to games like Splatoon.
It provides constant stimulation, which is something that Among Us just doesn't do.
The stimulation in Among Us comes from the social deduction, which is the fundamental part of the game. If you don't get stimulation from that, then this game wasn't meant for you in the first place. Comparing this game to Splatoon is incredibly stupid, because Splatoon is not a social deduction game. It's a shooter where you have to conquer more territory than the other. So again, I don't know how you can make this comparison, except for the fact you're really dumb.
In Splatoon 2, you're making sure that you have the most upward-facing surface area covered with your ink. In Among Us, you walk around and doing remedial tasks that are barely stimulating at all.
The mini-games in Among Us are not supposed to be stimulating. That's something you have to do in the background and is also a key factor that forces the imposter to do something. Because guess what? If the imposter doesn't kill everybody by the time everybody completes their tasks, the imposter loses. But the most stimulating part of Among Us is the social deduction aspect, where everyone has to figure out who the imposter is. And for the imposter, the stimulating part for that role is killing the crewmates and being good at it without getting ejected. Stop with this comparison to Splatoon. It's really stupid.
In Splatoon 2, you have multiple different game modes. In Among Us, you have one game mode. In Splatoon 2, you have highly detailed character models and lots of nice scenery to look at. In Among Us, you have backpacks with legs and sometimes hands, with very bland-looking scenery that barely stands out from anything else you'd see on Newgrounds. Actually, no, I take that back. Something that doesn't stand out from anything on Newgrounds.
I mean, that's kind of ironic seeing how Among Us was made by the people behind Henry Stickmin. You don't think the Newgrounds community would take notice of how unique this game is? You know how critically acclaimed the Henry Stickmin series was? Of course people are going to take notice of Among Us because of that.
In Splatoon 2, you have many different options to customize your playstyle. In Among Us, you don't get diddly dick for customizing your playstyle at all.
I mean, besides the roles that we got later down the line, there's not much you can really add to this type of game in terms of playstyle. It's literally a game of whodunit. What more do you want? This isn't a Call of Duty game, my guy.
Hopefully you understand where I'm coming from with these complaints and comparisons.
No, I don't think anybody knows where you're coming from, because your comparisons and complaints do not make sense.
The game's structure just doesn't allow for a very stimulating experience, and the game's longevity suffers as a result of this.
That is just factually incorrect, as a lot of people are capable of getting a stimulating experience from Among Us, and it's literally because of the social deduction aspect of it, something you clearly lack the skills and capabilities of.
Among Us is an ugly, repetitive, lacking in scope, tedious waste of time. The fact that you can waste your money and hard drive space to play this shit heap on your TV is even more frustrating. Why the fuck should I waste a single half cent just to play something that only uses one button and a single joystick on a more powerful piece of hardware?
Bro, it's $5. That is pocket change. If it were anything above that, you would have a bit of an argument, but you don't. $5 is nothing, and it makes sense that it would cost only that much because of how minimalistic the game is in terms of how you play it, technically speaking.
This shit is already an embarrassment to the modern smartphone, a platform that has Angry Birds 2, Call of Duty Mobile, Asphalt Legends, Transformers Forged to Fight, and many more better-looking games. The fact I can waste actual money on this thing and play it on the same platform that I used to play Resident Evil Village or Doom Eternal is nothing more than an insult of the highest order to the console I rely on to offer me some of the best games I've ever played.
My god, bro is actually having a temper tantrum because god forbid, a funny party game costs $5 when it's not on mobile. The Among Us crewmate has got to be his sleep paralysis demon. You cannot convince me otherwise. Among Us is in his nightmares. That is how much this guy hates this game.
If I have to watch TV just to get through your game, you really f***ed up! Among Us is more overhyped than Avengers Infinigame.
Again, the reason why Among Us blew up so much in 2020 was because of the pandemic. It gave a lot of people something to do in the meantime while they were on lockdown. And it was fun to do for a lot of people. You just aren't one of them.
Don't for a second tell me that Five Nights at Freddy's or Undertale have a bad fan base when Among Us fans will come out of the woodworks and randomly blurt out its name for no goddamn reason. Don't come to me and tell me that Five Nights at Freddy's is try hard when Among Us doesn't try in the slightest.
You're comparing the Among Us community, a community that likes to spam Among Us when they see something that vaguely looks like a crewmate, to two different communities that are not only extremely degenerate, but are also notorious for having some of the most disgusting people within them, pedophiles included. You know that's why those communities get attacked so much, right? Because there are genuinely some disgusting people in those communities, and yet I haven't heard a single horrible person that's within the Among Us community. But with that was the end of Roadbreach's god-awful review of Among Us. I don't know how you can fuck up this bad with a review for Among Us of all games. You could probably make a lot of good arguments on things Among Us suffers from, like the public lobbies, but Roadbreach somehow flops horribly in this review, and he only played this game for 1 hour before coming to this conclusion. Like, how bad of a reviewer do you have to be in order to get to this point? I don't know, man, that's just crazy. Anyways, I'm done with this video. I hope you all enjoyed my response to it. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and until then, see you later, friends.